once for business plans. Fails to submit a business plan after notice. You put them on notice that they've got to submit one, they don't. Failure to submit or implement a business plan at high volume, high risk. Failure to report a release or threaten release. Knowing or willfully failing to report 100% increase in quantities within 30 days and failure to report within 30 days. A new chemical that poses a significant threat was not previously disposed. Again, these are examples. You're sitting there in the audience and you can all think of, well, I don't think that's true in this case, and I would probably agree with you.
On the question, the question of failure to report release or threat release, that is a big issue amongst our group, in the sense that when a release occurs, the party that caused the release is preoccupied with fire engines and ambulances and everything, and he fails to report the release in 24 hours, but he reports it after he's told to report it. And that's a tough one.
And it wasn't really a question, it was a very good comment about when is immediate reporting of a release. And there is a little bit in Title 19, a little bit of discussion on that. And I looked at the federal regs because, as some of you may or may not know, we're looking at the entire business plan law because it needs to be updated for online reporting. And I was assigned the task, or got voluntold, as I say, of what is non-significant, what is threatened, and what is immediate. And those aren't easy questions. I wish, if any of you have a good, clear definition, what you think should be for, I think I'm okay with threatened, actually. It's immediate, and there's some guidance in Title 19 and federal regs, or what is non-significant that you don't have to report. If you've got a good, clear idea, I would love it. You know, and I'm talking about something language we could put in the law. It's an opportunity to rewrite the law. And I would love for you to give that to me, because I'm struggling. Please, I'll give you my email. It's on here. Read this one. This is right out of the law. The handler fails after reasonable notice. That means you've told them in some fashion that they've got to submit a business plan. The administrating agency, and we change that to UPA when we change this, shall immediately take appropriate action to enforce this article, including the imposition of civil and criminal penalties. That's the law telling us what to do. So if we're not doing this, what are we doing? You included these, didn't you, Kasey? So
yes, I did.
And then violation classification in the tiered permitting program, and the different tiers are different. So examples of tiered permitting, minor violations. They didn't include all the emergency equipment in their contingency plan. The written training documents are missing titles of the employees handling the hazardous waste. Failure to update closure costs annually for PBRs for CA is a class 2. These days they don't change much, so you might argue that
That's true.
the inflation factor is running close to 0. I think 0.7 or something. Failure to maintain a written inspection log. Failure to keep the secondary containment empty would be examples of class 2. Class 1, failure to obtain authorization. What's the point of the law? Failed to provide secondary containment around treatment units. Hazardous waste being treated came from an off-site source. They're accepting off-site waste. Those can be very complex, usually involve DTSC and a lot of people, but that happens. And failure to maintain financial assurance for PBR and C. That's by definition a class 1 violation in the law. Examples for USTs. Minor violation, no maintenance of monitoring records on site. They did it, they don't have the record on site. Unless you allow it, unless you say it's okay, then it's not a violation at all. Unless you're agency. Notice how we're going with USTs. Minor. The one of 12 records isn't on site, but they did it. They found it. Arguably, if they find it, that's probably not a, you know, you could, that's, depending on how it's done, it's a violation. But I wouldn't get real, that's one a district attorney wouldn't take, you know. Failure to document a recordable release. Mechanical monitoring device within the under dispensary containment is not operational. How many UST inspectors in here? Yeah. I think about 10% of the time we go out in the line, a mechanical line leak detector, about 10% of the ones we look at are bad. But that's the only time of the year they check it, really, is that, and we do our inspections in conjunction with the annual certification, and so it's the only time I do it, and so, yeah, I mean, that's an important part, the line leak detector. Important. I mean, we're out there to make sure they can contain releases and detect them. It's a key component there. But we say it's class 2. Yes?
Just a little sidebar. On the document or recordable lease, are we talking over a pint at regular gasoline facility stations? Or I know there's inspectors in the room on that, but recordable under, we're going to clean it up, all that good stuff, but when we talk about recordable, call your local UST agency, let them know you got a spill. What's the threshold where you have to make that call? And stay on the ground, it was self-contained, fully clean, didn't go into any storm or waterway, anything like that.
If I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of you in here should know it better than I do, if they have a release into secondary containment, like the spill bucket or into, you know, the turbine sump, and they clean it up within 8 hours of detection, that's recordable, not reportable.
Right.
So.
I mean on the lot by customer gas spill, that type of thing. Filling up the vehicle overflows, it's less than a pint, you know, it's going to be cleaned by the station personnel, and all that type of stuff. Usually it's more than a pint that happens to, but what's a threshold for any of the other inspectors when they're doing that? They want their local UST agency to be notified.
The question is let's say I'm filling up my gas tank and spill some, I'm being careless and spill some at the station, and so that's release. And what's the reporting threshold? The answer is, I don't know. On Monday night, we had an industry roundtable, and although they did not ask that exact question, that was one of their biggest problems. It said every jurisdiction's different, every CUPA is different, we don't know, and
Call your CUPA.
yeah, call your CUPA and ask, but we're trying to figure out a way to come to some kind of consistent reporting threshold for those kind of things. And that's another thing, if you've got a good idea on, we're open to ideas here because we're struggling. We got to reconcile it with a bunch of federal laws and regulations and California too, but it's a tough one. Yes, sir.
The semi-annual report requires that you document how many sites are in compliance with release prevention versus release detection. Not all Title 23 violations fall into one of those categories. Is there a correlation between your classifications of 2, et cetera, minor, into those type of classifications on the other side of the semi-annual reporting responsibility form?
Yeah, the question was, in the US EPA, their underground storage tank looks at what they call significant operational compliance. Drives me nuts because the waste people look at significant non-compliance, and they have different standards for both. But when we did this document, we did not consider SOC, significant operational compliance. So there's no direct linkage, although I think you could make one. Failure to make timely repairs for failed secondary containment. At some point that becomes a class 1. I think most of our recent tank cases where the people aren't making much money. Some of the poor, obviously now you still got to comply with the regulations. Does it have a designated operator? Does it have monthly inspection reports and attachments? Okay, class 1 for USTs. Tampering with the monitoring equipment. Failure to repair, they know about it, they don't repair non-functional monitoring equipment. That's the purpose of the law, release, containment, release, detection. Failure to report an unauthorized release, failure to repair secondary containment, failure to complete past secondary containment, failure to properly close. You see those, they're pretty clear. They're ignoring the whole intent of the law, what we're out there for. CalARP, minor, a program element is missing from the registration. A stationary short reported gallons instead of pounds, for the RMP. Class 2, the 5-year update is late. The RMP is not updated within 6 months after an accidental release, and they did not meet the 3-year internal compliance requirements of the audit program for the last term. So CalARP, very similar in our thinking here. Class 2, they did not meet the change requirements for program 3. It depends on the program level. That would be consistent with the volume of the waste, the proximity to the population, the risk, those sort of factors. Did not maintain an investigative report for releases. No hot work permits were issued for program level 3 when flammable or combustible materials are on site, and they did do a process hazard analysis or hazards review every 5 years, excuse me. Class 1, no incident investigation conducted for significant releases. Failure to update the RMP that requires a revised off-site consequences analysis within 6 months of change. The owner-operator did not complete an initial hazard review program or Program 2, or they did not complete an initial process hazard review for Program 3. Yes, sir.
What about, I have facility didn't report
Are you saying they failed to do a plan, or they had an RMP and didn't include?
show up on their business plan was discovered during the inspection and they had to pass and sign that. So we have to, I'm just thinking that's probably class 1, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Ooh. Let me do that. I'm messing up here. A technical problem. So you're saying that I think that sounds like a Class 1 violation, but depending on the circumstances. But when we're involved in the CalARP program and failure reporting, it's pretty. The reason we have the programs because the outside consequences will probably kill the neighbors. I mean, you know. Now, let's see, if I covered this. Yep.
Is it required on your inspection report when you leave the facility to classify the violation, or can you just say this is a violation?
Now, I think the minimum requirement, what you want to do in your inspection report is cite the violation, record the evidence, your observations that support the elements of that violation, and provide them some instruction for corrective action. In the past, we've had prosecutors that would prefer we did not classify the violations. I think we're going down that path pretty soon with electronic reporting. I think it's inevitable, but at this point, I know I'm confident there's no clear requirement for it.
So my question was, if you want to go to enforcement, can you reclassify those up or down in your enforcement?
Absolutely. You can always, based on additional evidence, you could always reclassify violations. Additional thing. Then we're going to the question was basically, or do you have to classify at the time of the inspection? I said, no, you don't. Above Ground Petroleum Storage Act, brand new, minor, the 5-year review 6 months late. You see the trend, failure to keep written procedures and inspection records with the plan. Failure to maintain adequate records of drainage from diked areas. That we're talking about paperwork for minor. After they drain rainwater, they fail to close the valves from secondary containment. Would be a Class 2 because the secondary containment doesn't work until they close the valve. if they're a non-qualified facility, they didn't get a PE to certify their plan. And then failure to submit plan amendments. The facility has a change in design, construction, operations, significant changes to the facility. That's class 1. Drainage system in undiked area flows into a stream. Failure to prepare a spill prevention control and countermeasures plan. And corrective action is not taken on exposed sections of buried pipe when deterioration causing a release is found. Our goal here is to provide clear examples and then leave you out in the field for the hazy ones to try to figure out on your own. You know?
That's exactly right.
So again, we're just repeating. Now we're talking about elevating violations. I'm going to turn it over to my respected colleague and superior speaker,
Not you, but thank you. I got one.
Kasey Foley. Yeah.
Okay. Is it working?
Yeah, I just was forgetting to hit the green button
Okay.
periodically.
And you can hear.
I need more training.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so elevating the violation classifications. These are examples designed to show the application of factors to the same violation that result in the same violation being classified differently. We want to show the thought processes for each example, but you'll see as we go along that we might have failed to do so. But Mike will chime in and do that. There we go. So for elevating the business plan, failure to report a hazardous material inventory, it's a minor violation if the business plan that has implemented an HMMP is historically reports its materials. If they historically report them accurately and then they fail to report one cylinder containing greater than 200 cubic feet of compressed carbon dioxide in the facility inventory. And we won't even discuss carbon dioxide because that was quite a long discussion yesterday, but for purposes of this example, we're saying this is a minor violation. And in my county, it would be a minor violation. So a class 2 would be, we have this facility that historically reported accurately but failed to report 10 cylinders containing greater than 2,000 cubic feet of compressed CO2. So they failed to report one inventory item that's relatively benign, again, no discussion here, and handled in a relatively large quantity. No comments, okay. So elevating the UST example. So failure to conduct annual monitoring system certification every 12 months. All monitoring equipment shall be certified every 12 months for operability. So a minor is during this annual monitoring cert, it was noted that it was 1 month late. All on-site written records indicate they'd done their monitoring cert within 12 months for the prior 3 years. So they have a record, a history of doing it on time. This time they were a month late. So they didn't meet the letter of the law. But we're saying that that's a minor violation. A class 2 would be if they did it was done 15 months after their last certification. So I was giving this presentation just, to my people at my work, and I said 15 months after their year late. So I was making it sound like it was really late, and I was calling it a class 2. This is only really 3 months after it would have been due. So we're calling that a class 2 violation. It's a pattern of missing, the written records indicate that the previous certifications were done within 12 months. I'm hoping we have a class 1 here. We don't have a class 1 here. Okay, so a class 1 would be that 15 month after the annual certification. Did I skip one, or there really wasn't? Okay. Okay, so another class 2, during that annual monitoring cert, it was 15 months after last certification. Records indicate 3 previous years, it was always late. So we're making that a class 2 also. Class 1, facility had not conducted their monitoring certification. I think we can all in this room agree that's a class 1 violation, and that's why Mike pointed out that we're giving you the obvious examples so we look good when we give this presentation. But when you're out in the field and you have to write these down, it's a really difficult call to make sometimes. So your notice of violation was sent to the facility, registered mail, return receipt was received back. They had every ample opportunity to comply. They're put on notice, and they just didn't do it. So for the CalART program, we're elevating this. Minor violations, some of the design information is missing from a program 3. Some of the design information is missing for equipment that will not lead to a release if broken or out of service when the facility was performing their PHA or hazard review. But the PHA was completed on time. So our reasoning for this being a minor violation is there was no increased risk, no economic benefit since the equipment is present. And as Mike mentioned, anytime we say there's no economic benefit, we're kind of doing that in quotes because anytime something isn't done, you have saved time, saved money, saved staff time, training, whatever. Class 2 for program 3, some of the design information is missing for equipment that will not lead to a release if broken or out of service when the facility was performing a PHA or hazard review, but the PHA was not completed on time or within 5 years. So there is an economic benefit due to delayed costs. So as Lisa had mentioned before, you have this other category which is delayed. Not absent, but delayed. And then cost savings from not completing the PHA on time. And no class 1. So a hazardous waste example, storage without a permit longer than the time frame. So we have a small quantity generator. And the label had an accumulation start date 182 days, for 182 days after the date you're there. Operator indicates the facility was closed for a week after Christmas. The pickup was scheduled, but the transporter asked for a delay of 2 days. The facility has a history of shipping its waste every 170 to 180 days, so you can see that they have a history of being in compliance. And there's a clear economic benefit. It's minor, but measurable, that exists by extended storage times. Not a class 1 since the history of compliance and circumstances of extended time and there's a lack of significant threat. You're probably saying, why is this such a long example? That's because DTSC was in this group of, of making this example, and they had a really difficult time coming up with something that they could allow not be a class 1. So it had to be SQG, and had to be just 2 days off, and had to be Christmas, and so it was funny that happened. But
So I have a question about that. So what would you envision as a CUPA, what are they going to do to that business? They wrote that down in their inspection report. What are you going to do?
so your question is, what do you do if you write down a minor violation?
So what do you do to that business because you did an inspection and gave them a class 2 violation for that? Is it just, it's just documented, or a class 2 is going to
But
cause them a fine?
so your question is, what would the CUPA do if you wrote down this class 2 violation for this specific business and violation? It would vary on, every circumstance varies. So which is something we didn't actually discuss, was the beauty of class 2 violations. You can go either way with that. When you take it back to your office and you want to determine, based on reviewing the file, talking with others, past history, other information you might get, you might decide either they've always been entirely compliant, they've never had a problem, and we'll just leave it there on the books. We'll go out next time, and if the same problem, elevate it to a class 1. If you go back and you find you've talked with others and they said, oh, they always do that. I forgot to write it down last time. Sometimes that happens. And you'll uncover additional information because it has to be useful to the prosecutor, then you can elevate it to a class 1.
I think we see that as some of these statewide cases, or we just did one in San Diego, I remember, against Arco BP, and it's $4.5 million settlement, and they were largely class 2 violations. But the pattern was so clear, that you could argue that they couldn't be class 2 because they were doing it at every station consistently.
That's a good point. Yes?
When you go through this assessment, do you go back to your inspection and enforcement plan and specify these so that each time you do an enforcement outage, you have new this is how we're going to do this?
So the question is, do you base your categorization on your inspection enforcement plan? Yes, that's what we're hoping everybody does, and we're hoping that the inspection enforcement plan reflects the use of this document. That's a great question. So did I go over this one? Still a class 2, okay. So for the class 1, we have a small quantity generator, but the accumulation start date was 300 days ago. The operator indicates the facility only really generates the waste in the fall. The business is always slow during the winter months. It takes longer to fill the drum. It costs too much to ship. You're writing these down in your notes as you're talking to the person. And to ship drums that aren't full, manifests showed that very little waste is shipped from the facility in intervals under 180 days. It's a class 1 because the majority of the requirement is being ignored. Storage without a TSDF permit. The facility has a pattern of neglecting the requirement during lower production times with the waste because it's saving them money. They're getting an economic benefit from this. So elevating the APSA example, failure to prepare an SPCC. A minor violation is a facility that stores 110,000 gallons of petroleum that has implemented their SPCC plan fails to include 10 55-gallon drums on the facility diagram. So the facility failed to include a relatively small amount, in this case it's 5% of the petroleum on the facility diagram. In the next example, we have the same facility, but they have 110 gallons of petroleum, and they failed to include a 20,000-gallon tank in this circumstance. So the facility failed to include a relatively large amount, 20% of petroleum on the facility diagram. So we're making that a class 2. It's the same one. That's the same one. Okay, so a class 1, a facility is storing this 110,000 gallons. They've implemented their SPCC, but it doesn't have secondary containment for that 20,000 gallon tank that they didn't include the first time, and it's 50 feet from a river. So the facility failed to have secondary containment, which is for a tank in close proximity to waters of the state. You kind of can't miss that one, the point of the program. So Mike has mentioned SIRS and the significance of the electronic reporting. It's really important that we all sort of get on the same page and have a thought process behind our violation determination, because SIRS is really soon, if not now. And you can find all of this on the Cal EPA website. And I did want to remind people that you need to make sure, if you wanted, not related to this, your REHS credits, you need to make sure that you fill out an evaluation. You can do it online, or you can do it right now. And just put them in the back of the room, and we'll get them to the CUPA Forum Board. But please make sure you do that, and make sure you fill out one for the entire conference as well. Get that turned in before Thursday at noon. And if you want to do it electronically, you don't have a computer, there's going to be a lab Thursday morning in the boardroom number 4, where you can use their computers. That's where they're doing the online training.
You've got until a week from Friday to do them. I did them this morning. It was pretty easy online.
Sorry, questions?
So.
Interested, you kind of touched on it as to how to make it consistent amongst staff. You know, one inspector sees one thing, another inspector writes it up a different way. I mean, do you share, like, have a meeting and different?
So the question is, yes, how do you make it consistent among staff? It's a really enjoyable mini staff meeting discussion, and it gets hot in the room when you talk about it, and people are very emotional about it, passionate. Yes, you have to discuss it.
Discuss it in your staff meeting.
Yes. I'm sorry.
We just have a requirement in our office to, whenever we have an AEO,